Okay, guys, today we have our third installment of Texas History Online. Today we've gone from the Great Depression, which was our last lesson, to World War II. Obviously, since we had World War One, we're going to have World War II. We're going to get into that today a little bit, just to give you an idea. We had the Great Depression happened, and the one thing that was able to get us out of the Great Depression, amidst all the other things that were done during the New Deal, was World War II, just because of the massive spending that was done by the U.S. government. We're going to get into what happened to get this thing going. And so today, one of the biggest reasons for World War II to happen was because of the growing nationalism in both Europe and Asia. Remember, we talked about last time about nationalism during World War One, the pride in your country, or that kind of thing. For many reasons, whenever World War One ended, it did not bring peace and prosperity like it was supposed to. There was lots of turmoil, revolutions going on all over Europe. It also brought about the rise of dictators who were driven by the belief in nationalism. Many of the dictators dreamed of territorial expansion. They wanted to expand and they wanted to make their country bigger. So this was really, really bad for the world. Our dictators that we're looking at in this unit is first of all, the bad guys that we're mainly concerned about in this one is Adolf Hitler from Germany, Hideki Tojo from Japan, Benito Mussolini from Italy. So those were the main guys. You also had a guy from Spain, but we're not going to worry about him. Uh, on the other side, with the good guys, fighting with the good guys, was a guy named Joseph Stalin. He was also a dictator. He was a dictator in the Soviet Union with the Bolsheviks, uh, and took power whenever the Bolshevik Revolution happened. Um, let's go ahead and get into the war now. So we have, you know, we look at the war and many, many reasons why the United States had to get involved. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. In response to the fighting in Europe, the United States provided economic and military aid, money mainly, but lots of tanks, lots of planes, that kind of thing, to help the Allies achieve victory. We wanted to stay out of it, just like we wanted to stay out of World War One. We wanted to stay out of the war, but Roosevelt decided to run for a third term in office. This was kind of unprecedented at the time. Even though it wasn't illegal, most presidents left office after two terms, but he ran for a third and he won. So, what brought us into the war? First thing is we have these two different things. First one is a law that was called the Lend-Lease Act, and what it did is it gave money and arms, like ammunition and guns, and supplies to nations fighting the Axis powers, which was Germany, Italy, and Japan. We also had German submarine warfare. Germans attacked at will out in the Atlantic Ocean and made it very, very difficult for the U.S. to get our stuff over to Europe. Probably the biggest mess up in the war for the Axis powers was whenever Japan actually attacked the United States, because it brought the United States into the war. The U.S. had put an embargo, which basically cutting off supply of oil and planes to Japan, and Japan needed these items to complete its military conquest of the Pacific and Asia, but we didn't like the way they were doing things and running things, so we stopped that aid to them. Plus, they were on the other side, so we didn't want to help out our enemy. So the Japanese decided that they were going to attack the U.S., and they thought that the best place that they could do this was Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. It was the home of the entire American Pacific Fleet. in 1941. Everything that we had, all of our boats, all of our planes that were used to fighting, defending the Pacific, was stationed at Pearl Harbor. Japan launched a surprise attack on the base on December 7th, 1941. Very, very important date there. This action unified the country and threw America into World War II. This was the most important thing that brought us into the war. This was kind of like back in World War I, the Zimmerman Note and some of those things. That was kind of what brought the United States in. So the aftermath of Pearl Harbor was devastating. Japanese ships attacked Pearl Harbor for an hour and a half. They killed 2,403 Americans, and another 1,178 Americans were wounded. It also damaged 21 of our ships, and this was a big problem for us because it did do a lot of damage to our Navy. So what did we have to do? We had to turn around and mobilize, which means that we had to get going, and we had to try to figure out how we were going to get into this war because, it was on now. We got attacked, so it was time to go to war, even though we had stayed out of it for a long time. The war had been going on since 1938, and, the date of December 7th, 1941. So we stayed out of the war for over 3 years. So the economics effect of World War II was that it brought the end of the Great Depression, like I mentioned earlier. Massive military orders in 1942 instantly soaked up the idle industrial capacity of the still lingering Depression. I certainly don't want a war, but spending is very, very important to bring out of a depression. And hopefully what the government's doing now will help out in bringing about the end of our depression, quote unquote depression that we're in. Millions of men and women went back to work in these well-paying defense jobs. So unemployment virtually came to an end, and that's what we hope happens today. We don't want a war, but we would sure like to end that unemployment that's going on right now. So we were having to fight on two fronts. We needed large amounts of soldiers. About 5 million volunteered to enter the armed forces. Another 10 million were drafted. So we put 15 million soldiers into the war. About 8 weeks of training, and these former civilians became soldiers. Some different groups that were involved in the war. Among the new soldiers were about 300,000 Mexican Americans and about 1 million African Americans. There were also many thousand Asian and Native Americans that fought for the American side, the Allied side. There was also a big contingent of women. Now, women weren't allowed to be in combat, but they were very much involved. About 200,000 women served in the military, but we still know about all the inequities and things such as pay and benefits and that kind of thing. They didn't have the same benefits as men did. The WAAC to the WACs. So in May of 1942, the U.S. Army dropped the auxiliary status and granted WAACs full U.S. Army benefits. WAAC stands for the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps. And so they dropped that auxiliary status, so it was just the WAC after that, which was the Women's Army Corps. And what they did is they worked as nurses, ambulance drivers, radio operators, electricians, pilots, nearly every duty they could do without being able to be in direct combat. Now, there was a group that was pretty important to the fighting of the war, the OSRD, the Office of Scientific Research and Development. And the government recruited scientists to develop new weapons and medicines to help give us an advantage. So this effort produced a lot of amazing things like radar and sonar and penicillin, and other miracle drugs that were used, morphine, some of those kind of things, uh, were used to help um, in fighting this war. One of the big weapons that they produced was in the Manhattan Project, and this was the most significant achievement and the most deadly. Um, the atomic bomb was produced by the OSRD. Much of the early research was done at Columbia University in Manhattan. Therefore, the name Manhattan Project became the code name for the research. And so this was the main reason, or the main thing that knocked Japan out of the war, because we used the atomic bomb twice. Only time it's ever been used in history was in this war, where the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and then a couple of days later on Nagasaki, trying to force the Japanese out of the war, because it would have been very, very difficult to try to launch an invasion on the island of Japan. And so they used this to save American lives, even though it was very, very deadly to the Japanese, women and children and civilians and all of that. They felt that that was the best way um, to end the war. So that is basically World War II summed up, at least America's involvement in World War II. Texas had a big impact in World War II, spent a lot of soldiers, a lot of money, and a lot of aid uh, coming out of Texas. So to sum all this stuff up, we've got, from the last unit, we got the Great Depression, which had a boom and bust cycle of cotton and agriculture. We had the New Deal programs that were trying to fix the problems of the Great Depression. We had the Dust Bowl, which was caused by drought and over farming. We have Sam Rayburn, who was very instrumental in the development of the New Deal, and ran Texas for a while, part of Speaker of the House, those kind of things in Texas legislature. And World War II relieved the problems of the Great Depression and helped get us out of it. And then you have World War II in Texas, where you had rationing, kind of similar to where we have now, where we can't find toilet paper, even though we're not rationed, but it's hard to find. We had military installations all throughout Texas. We also had internment camps here in Texas, where we held Japanese soldiers, or excuse me, not Japanese soldiers, but Japanese citizens. We interned them to make sure that they weren't enemies. The economy was great, vastly improved in Texas because of the New Deal. Large numbers of Texans served in the war, and industries grew. Large amounts of oil and gas were needed to fight this war. Also, agriculture was greatly needed to help feed the troops. So Texas benefited greatly, from economically from the war. So that will sum up World War II. I will be getting into the civil rights movement next week. So hope y'all have a good week, and see you later.